Hello, I'm Jamie, friendly neighborhood crafting weirdo, and with the spooky season upon us, I have been called by the siren song of fantasy. Something about leaves falling just gets me in the mood for some high fantasy shenanigans. This is also inspired in no small part by an account called The Wizard's Keep, which I will be linking in the show notes as well as mentioning here. They recently posted something called Project RenFaire. Basically, the idea is they've set up a series of tables that you roll randomly from that give you a concept for either a full costume, a costume piece, or a costume sketch. You have the entirety of the month of September, and then you send it into their account and they'll share it as part of Project RenFaire. I also... I've been in a bit of a creative rut lately, so it's really nice to just take a complete 90-degree angle from everything else that I've been doing and try something new. Part of my problem right now is that I have too many irons in the fire, so why am I adding a new project? Well, a lot of those other things I'm working on are much more long-term. This is a nice, quick, completely different thing. I'm hoping it'll just kind of blow the cobwebs out and get me feeling nice and fresh again, and I feel excited about it, so who am I to say no to that? So the list is here. And based on those results, I have a lot to work with. It should surprise absolutely no one that I am a longtime Renaissance Fair enjoyer. So I have a lot of things in my costume collection that already fit the brief that I rolled. What we're gonna do is we're going to review what I have, and then we'll try to put together a costume. So let's get started. I have a couple of goals with this project aside from just fulfilling the prompt, but the prompt is actually working in my favor in a couple of different ways here. So let me just kind of explain what I'm talking about here. I'm trying to figure out a way to create a full costume that fits the prompt that I've been given while leveraging mostly pieces that I already have. And fortunately, I have been doing Renaissance fairs since 2008. Please don't try to guess how old I am based on that. But that means that I have a closet full of pieces that I've already made. So let's take a look at what we're working with. So first off, we have this tunic. It's one of my favorite pieces that I've made. This is a nice light linen that's been laundered a couple of times, so it's soft. I might add a little length to the bottom hem, but you can see at the cuffs, the sleeves are gathered into these nice little embroidered cuffs. And the keyhole neckline, similar situation. And this fits perfectly the medieval primary colors. There's a little laundry soap residue on there that I can work on, and some repair threads, it looks like. But, you know, I have worn this to multiple events, art fairs, Renaissance fairs. It's a real workhorse garment for me, and I'm happy to get to be using it again. This is another tunic that I ended up scrapping because it was an earlier attempt, sort of an alpha version of the yellow one. I didn't know how to do a keyhole neckline properly, so it looks like it's gonna tear. And also with the color schemes that I picked and the way that I put it together, it kind of looks like Gaston from Beauty and the Beast, and that's also not what I'm going for. But what we do have here is some more of that yellow linen and some red linen. So I think what's going to happen, you can see the hash I made of that keyhole neckline, like, good lord. But I think I can disassemble this and get some nice big pieces of linen to work with. So it will be given new life. This is kind of a, I guess, thigh-length vest thing. This is before I really started working with any sort of period techniques or really knew what I was doing sewing at all. It lived its life as part of a sort of makeshift ranger outfit. It's not really a primary color, although I usually think of green as kind of an honorary primary color. color theorists get at me, I guess. But it's a nice fabric, and I might be able to disassemble it and reuse some of the pieces. So, last but not least, we have this really nice navy linen, which has not been made into anything, and I can't remember why I bought it. But it goes perfectly with the color scheme, it matches the other materials I want to be using, so I am happy to incorporate it into this project. So I really just started from basics here. First with writing down the 3 parts of the prompt that I was given, and then sketching out a rough approximation of my proportions. I knew this outfit would be based around that yellow tunic, so I rough in the silhouette of that first, and then just start building the other elements of the outfit that I knew I would want to do. This will, of course, incorporate my adventurer's boots, as well as some fur trim on those, some period-appropriate tights, a waist belt, a pouch, a knife, a Robin Hood hat, and a hood. Now, where does the whimsy come in? Part of it is in the dagging on the hood. That's the name that you use to refer to that sort of fancy cutout sort of technique that was used in garments of the period. And another place that the whimsy comes in is through the primary colors. So we have the base layer of yellow, and I decided to go with party color. That is not color for partying, but rather partial color, which was a popular technique used in the medieval period, where you would piece a garment together out of half and half different colors. So I'm just going with red and blue to stick with the primaries, and then green for the Robin Hood style hat, because of course that's the color that you would pick for that. And then we get to the beast part, which I've yet to decide what we're doing there. So that'll be a mystery for later. The hood is sort of the secondary foundational garment for this costume. So I'm starting with the amount of fabric that I have the least of. So if I build half of the hood out of that, I know that the remainder will be enough in the blue color that I'm going to use later. So here's the math that I used to determine how I wanted to measure out the circle for the neck. And me trying on and realizing that a circle profile for the shoulders was not going to work, because turns out shoulders not circular. And I'm just mirroring this onto the secondary fabric, and then pinning the two together so that I can try it on. And now we do the most complicated part of this, which is the dagging. So rather than do the math for an ellipse, I just decided to manually measure 1/4 of my circumference and quadruple that, and try to figure out how to divide it up evenly. And as you can see, I just kind of roughed it out until it looked about correct. Where I'm saved here is that by folding it into quarters, I only had to cut each piece twice, and that resulted in a nice symmetrical pattern on the other end. And then I had to hem the entirety of the perimeter, and I decided to go ahead and round the interior edges because interior facing corners are a lot harder to hem than exterior facing corners. I was also working against the fact that a real medieval garment would have been made out of wool, not linen, which would have been a lot easier to hem. In any case, moving on to the hood. Since we're going for party color with this as well, the depth of the hood is going to be 1/2 of the neck circumference. And I could have gone with any shape for the back of the hood here. I decided to keep it relatively simple with just a regular point. But if you ever look up lyra pipes, they got pretty wacky with the shape and length of the backs of hoods. It was kind of a flex to see how long you can make yours. Alright, so progress. We have a hood attached to our dagged cowl. And all the seams around the neckline are finished. And the seam on the pointed hood is finished. And whoops, I made the hood pieces too short. And now we have a big raw edge here, so I'm just going to cut out a couple of extra pieces and tack onto there. Yeah, this is what we get for kind of playing fast and loose with design and measurement, but I don't really regret it because it's just going to add a little bit of extra visual interest to the front of the hood. So, here we go. There's no measurement here, I'm just getting a feel for how much material I'll need to add. Starting with a square, folding to create a triangle with a finished edge. And then I'm sewing up one of those edges and flipping my triangle inside out, so then I have 2 finished edges. Then for the very last finished edge, and to hide all the raw seams, the 2 raw bits of fabric go wrong sides together. I backstitched this first one before realizing that it did not need to be stitched down that strongly, so I just do a regular running stitch for the red side. But I'm just attaching and then flipping so that our raw seams are all protected. And then I will whip stitch and tack on, not only along the neckline for aesthetic purposes, but also the remaining edge of the triangle to the actual hood section, so that everything stays in place. And then I just repeat it all on the other side and in the fresh color. All right, well, I am going to count that as a win. I think this is looking pretty good. The dagging was a huge pain in the butt, and the hand sewing, you know, I think it really was worth it because you've got some nice detail coming in, and the little weird gusset thingies I had to add to the hood. Actually, I feel like help frame things a little bit better, and it looks good down too, so I think I'm pretty happy with that. I've wanted a hood like this for my costume collection for a hot minute now. I'm not looking at the camera. There I go again, but I'm pretty happy with this. The thing is, I still have the legs to do, and I'm gonna let you in on a little bit of a secret. Legs are bigger than arms. I know, a shocking revelation. And what's more shocking is, give me just a minute here. I have just like scraps of this red linen left. And I don't think that's going to cut it for even one leg of the leggings that I had planned. So we're going to have to pivot a little bit, and we're going to have to do blue and I think the green linen maybe. even then, the amount I have of each of those is a little bit sketchy. So, you know, as the great Bernadette Banner always says, piecing is period. So we're just going to have to kind of improvise a little bit. So I guess let's figure that out. I am just going to rough out with the biggest piece of green linen left over from that tunic here. Just kind of rough out a shape and see where we are. I can already tell there's not enough room in the crotch and in the back, but gussets should take care of that. So I'm just gonna pin this to my waistline for now, and we will work from there. This is not at all period accurate, by the way. That resembles something. Alright, so the crafting gods seem to be with me on this one. I probably have to cut off as much of the green leg as is sticking over the end anyway, because that used to be where a collar was. But I think I'm just gonna have just enough of the blue with cutting out some additional gussets. There's the crotch gusset. There's also going to be another one for the butt. I think that'll be enough to carry me over. So, bit of luck there. So, yay. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, this is starting to look an awful lot like pants. Now, you know, there are two separate legs currently, so I guess it's a pair of pant currently. Got my gym shorts on for modesty. I think we're closing in on something pretty functional here. It's not quite meeting in the back or the front, which I suspected would be the case. I'm going to use some of the scrap fabric to put in a gusset and join the two pieces together. I didn't film this bit, it was all machine sewing. Those sure are some pants, and I've got some awkward lumpy bits that I probably want to attend to. I kind of need the extra flexibility in the center there for the bend, but not bad for a completely improvised pair of pants. Well, the fit's not like super great or anything, but you know, I whipped these up in about a day without a pattern, so you know, all things considered, not too bad. I think in future, what I might do is rework the crotch seam so that it's a little more wearable. Right now, there's about 4 pieces of fabric all coming together to a single point. And if you've ever sewn a garment before, that's not something you really want in an area that's going to be taking a lot of stress, as armpits and crotches of garments do. And I already heard a thread pop somewhere in there. So at some point in future, I will probably separate these into separate legs and add even more fabric through the center. But I'm going to be traveling for like 9 days in the middle of this month. And frankly, I don't have time to do that right now. I'd rather focus on finishing the other pieces. So we are going to set up a slightly different angle here. All right, so like I said, pants done, currently wearing. Hood finished, tunic, I showed you that at the beginning. So if we call back to our concept sketch, which I'll put on screen here, we have some accessories that we need to take care of. Fortunately, some of them are already part of my costume stash, so let me just walk you through that. We have some adventurer's boots, and I actually made these several years ago. You can tell because there's already a wear pattern on the bottom of them from where I've worn them to several years worth of events now. It's just a medieval turn shoe style bottom section there with the ankle and boot leg to get sort of the calf length, knee length adventurer boot to kind of play in the whole beast master, beast tamer space. I'm gonna put some little temporary fur cuffs on the top of that. I made some of those fur cuffs for an orc outfit a few years ago, and they should be in my costume stash somewhere, but I haven't found them yet, so we might need to remake those, but that should be easy enough. They're just a couple of loops. And we also have my medieval style belt. And I actually made this for my wife originally because she was dressed as a battle nun. Previously, these twin loops would form a sword sling for a side scabbard. Now, I don't really need that anymore, and I've been meaning for a few years now to rework the two pieces of this belt so that they're one single continuous piece that can be worn by itself without having to either wear a sword or the brooch shenanigans that were going on there. But also what we have going on, I have a little side pouch that I also made sometime in the past. It's made out of the same green fabric that I've made the right leg of the pants out of because this stuff's been knocking around in my stash for years now, and I've finally used up, I think, almost all of it. But it's just a little embroidered bag. It's got brown interior fabric, the green exterior fabric, embroidery to kind of cover up the seams, and this leather work that I'm super happy with. It's carved leather, hammered to be kind of an orc face, and unsurprisingly, this was crafted for my orc outfit. I haven't done any leather work yet for this video or on camera, period, but in addition to this pouch, which also features in the sketch, there's also a knife scabbard that I need, and I don't have that, so I'm going to grab my prop knife, something that I picked up, I think, from my very first Renaissance fair ever, and we're just gonna craft a little scabbard, maybe do a little bit of leather carving on it, and that'll be one of the remaining accessories done. There's the fur for the boots, and a hat. We haven't really addressed the beast of it all. We've definitely got the whimsy, we've definitely got the medieval primary colors, but where does the beast come in? And I have a couple of ideas for that. My original thought was to create an entirely new little guide just for this video, but effectively for me, there's only a week and a half left in the month of September, so I don't think that's realistically going to happen. We'll see what happens in the reveal. So bear with me. I started by reworking the belt because that was the easiest place to start. And when you're working with leather and you're cutting, usually it's better to do multiple strokes along the same line rather than trying to cut all in one go. Otherwise you end up with kind of ugly fuzzy edges that you'll have to clean up later, which, since I used kind of a shitty knife here, I ended up having to do anyway. But we will be proceeding with the better X-Acto knife from here forward. And we are rounding the corners of our right angles here because leather doesn't take to sharp points very well. Those tend to wear out very quickly and fray and just end up being really ugly. We will wax those newly created raw edges, and then use a slicker, also known as a burnisher. The friction and the wax working together basically helps to seal up the raw edges of your leather. If you're going to be dyeing your leather, you'll want to do this last because the wax will resist any dyeing, but these pieces are already dyed and I wasn't too worried about that. I went ahead and used the pre-punched side of the belt, separated from its old position, and use that as a guide to punch the new half of the belt. Make sure you don't stab yourself here. It's extremely easy to do that. And here we are going to be using waxed thread to do what is called a saddle stitch. You'll never guess why it's called that. It is the preferred stitch to use when you're making things that are going to be taking a lot of strain. Belts are a great example of that. Basically, the idea is that you will thread both ends of your thread through a needle, and then those needles are going to get passed through in opposite directions through each of your pre-punched holes. So each hole will have 2 lengths of thread going through it, pulled taut each time, and then over successive stitches, you're double reinforcing every single pass. So it ends up being a really strong hold. And everything that it made using the saddle stitch over the years has held up through multiple wears and a lot of abuse. So highly recommend. One thing to note, especially when you're working with thicker cuts of leather, as we are doing here, is even with pre-punched holes, sometimes you might need pliers to help the needles go through. So then you just repeat this forever. And with this belt, I decided to go with 2 lines of stitching, because just one and the pieces would have had a chance to flop around a little bit. I don't want that happening. I also crossed over between the 2 lines of stitching to create kind of a box shape, which you'll see better once we flip the belt. There we go. Yeah, so you can see where I'm sort of passing through in a box pattern, and at the end, you just tie off and snip the excess, and then we have a little treat at the end for the pyromaniacs in the audience. Yes, we are bringing out the firepower. This has 2 benefits when finishing up leather stitching. First, it burns off all the excess thread, and second, it melts the wax that was on those threads. So you can press that down with either your thumbnail like I did here, or any other hard surface, and you can finish off very securely. This is just a pattern that I drew off screen, basically just starting with an outline of my knife. This is an 8-ounce veg tan, undyed leather side. Yes, I had to learn all that terminology when I was first getting into leather work. 8-ounce basically just refers to the thickness of the leather that you're working with. I picked this entire side up for maybe $50 on a sale at Tandy Leather years ago, and I've been using it to make props ever since. So the upfront cost of leatherworking as a hobby can be a little steep, but once you get going, you can keep going for a good long while. So I used my scratch awl here to just outline the rough shape of the scabbard that I want, again using multiple strokes to free the piece from the rest of the leather. And when I say multiple strokes, I do mean a lot of extras, because it's been a minute since I've made a new leather piece. Here's particularly a rough area, but you know, sometimes you have to re-educate yourself. Just doing a little side-by-side, making sure that that shape is going to work out in the final material, and I'm pretty happy with it, so we proceed. So now we have the primary elements of our scabbard, but there's a few steps that we need to take care of before we end up joining them together. The first is imprinting the design onto the front-facing piece. And this purple tape you can find at any hardware store. Just make sure you look for the delicate surface masking tape because anything else might tear the surface of your leather. And I elected to go with just a plain pointy stick to trace out my pattern. It's just to get an impression on the leather. Later on, we will use a crafting blade to not cut all the way through the leather piece, but just sort of nick the surface of it so that when we hammer it later, the pattern that we want to emerge will be a lot sharper. And look at that. We're looking real good at this stage. And once again, be gentle with the knife here. You need to make sure that you're applying enough pressure to cut through that first smooth layer of the leather, but not so much pressure that you cut all the way through. This can be a delicate balance, and I have made errors in previous pieces before, so just be mindful and maybe work with some scraps when you're getting started. And before tooling any leather piece, always make sure to wet it down first. Just a dish rag with plenty of water, and make sure to let it sit for a little while so that it has a chance to soak in. This will make sure that it has enough give to really take the pattern you want to put into it. And then we get to work out our aggression. Now, much like every other step in this process, this one is pretty tedious, because rather than just mighty wallops to impress your pattern onto the leather, it's a bunch of little taps over and over again. And your leather will dry out as you do this, because as you can see, this is taking quite a while. So just make sure to re-wet as necessary. You know, you can just dunk it in water if you want. It will not wreck the piece. And so far, so good. You can see where the hammering has left a very nice, sharp impression. And unfortunately, the back half of that hammering process and the leather dyeing, the footage just is lost to digital space. But now we can compare our two pieces together, make sure that it's still going to fit all right. You can see in the upper right corner, there is a secret third piece of leather that I cut off screen. That's basically a piece that I created so that this scabbard can be mounted onto a belt. It's just slightly longer than the belt and slightly narrower than the scabbard, so it can just slide onto the belt. This is just footage of me pre-punching all of the holes, making sure to do the two pieces as a sandwich initially so that those sets of holes are basically in registration with each other. But then you have to go back with the awl again through all those holes to widen them enough for your needle to pass through. And this is preparation for putting that belt loop onto the back piece of the scabbard, which will just be saddle stitching into place, making sure that we have a good fit. I think this is going to look great at the end. And I really wanted to take a good long time to stare at it, apparently, but yes, here we go. Before stitching the belt loop on, we're going to put a couple of holes in the back piece of the scabbard. This is something that I thought up last minute, but if you have ever been to a Renaissance Fair event, you know that you have to tie up any weapon that you bring into its scabbard to make sure you don't go swinging at other patrons. So I'm just putting these extra holes in the back of the scabbard so that I can put a tie on my costume knife without it looking really out of place. It can be a nice subtle knot just holding it into the scabbard and pass through those back holes. So stitching on that belt loop, using the same technique that we did before to assemble the belt, and now we're going to saddle stitch around the entire perimeter of this scabbard. I think the stitch line in total was probably nearly 2 feet, so it took quite a while. This time lapse probably covers close to 2 hours. I watched the entirety of Beastmaster while doing this. And then once again, we flame out on the knot and use the back of the awl this time to press the melted wax into place and seal our work. So that is a finished scabbard, and we're just going to slide our prop knife in there, make sure it fits, and also just get some very satisfying footage of something fitting perfectly together. Look, not a bit of the blade is showing at the top. I love that fit. Well, some is showing at the back, but no one's looking at that. And now we're sliding onto our belt, and it's a little bit taut, but I prefer that to too loose. So yeah, there we go. Our antler blade is sheathed. So I looked up the pattern used to make this style of sort of Robin Hood-esque hat, and believe it or not, the medieval term for this style of hat is the bicocket, because the English are a profoundly unserious people. But I'm just taking the measurements of the circumference and peak of my head, and I'm just going to rough out a rectangle for 1/2 of our hat pattern. The rough shape that we're looking for here is kind of a lumpy triangle, and you'll see here I'm blocking in the basic measurements of my head, and this is the back face, and we're going to put a little funky peak in there, and then trace a gentle curve out towards the front. And you're going to want to leave that front section longer because that's where your fancy Robin Hood point is going to come from once you fold up the bottom side of your hat. This velvet is a scrap fabric left over from a project I did for a friend. It's a synthetic, which isn't my general preference, but it was readily available and free, and I've only spent $8 on this project so far on a new bottle of leather dye, and I really don't want to break that streak now. So to cover up the sort of awkward reverse side of this fabric where it's not velvety, I'm just creating a couple of fabric strips that are going to end up on the inside of our hat pieces. So that's just sewed onto the bottom there so that we can turn up the edges and not expose the raw fabric. So now we'll just, under the machine, join our two hat halves together. And with the halves joined together, I've just turned up and whip stitched the sort of loose edges of our protective strips onto the inside of the hat to make sure they don't move around. There's the little wiggly point, and we just turn up the brim to get our style. You'll find that in history, most hats are either folded circles or folded triangles. It's really weird when you start to break it down, but yeah, now we have a dandy little hat ready to go. That fellow Renault, a beast tamer be, neither swineherd, nor falconer, nor shepherd. He traineth no dog, no horseman is he, and no seeker of lion or leopard. Beasts he doth tame are of character queer, hidden in forest and hollow and fen. And to his true heart they all draweth near, emerging from nest and from clutch and den. Creatures from fairy and story-time tale, wyverns and redcaps and will-o'-the-wisps.
Those who are kindly and those who assail follow so gently the words from his lips. Patient and kind and not quick to anger, legend is he, Renaud the beast tamer.
Hello. Gotta say, I'm kind of digging the hat. The rest of the fit is currently in the wash because it's all covered in bug spray. The filming for the reveal took place in a local park, and the mosquito population here is not dead yet. We may be approaching fall, but we are not there fully. This was a hell of a lot of fun. It's been a minute since I've done a full costume project. Usually I am a annual Renaissance Fair attendee, but the last couple of years I've just been recycling costumes because, you know, life gets in the way. I buried the lead a little bit on y'all here because I said I was not going to be able to make a new little guy for this video. This is true. However, baby boy here was made before I started the channel and is actually one of the other fictional alien creatures from Route 6.6 called the Jack Zabbit. He is one of the most frequently encountered little creatures on the planet Beringer 1902, which is where most of Season 1 takes place. So I made him probably before we recorded Season 1, if I recall correctly. So I just had a bonus little guy lying around. Does he exactly fit the medieval theme? Well, I'll let you decide, but I think he might belong in some strange marginalia somewhere. Plus, he's got toe beans. But that's the handsome lad that accompanied me filming today. And I've got to say, I'm really happy with how all the pieces came out. The hat, I think, could use some embellishment in future. Maybe some beading or a feather, as demonstrated in the original sketch that I had. I had the idea of, during the reveal, having the hood up, having it down. That didn't really come out so much in the edit, but that is why I didn't put the feather in here. The hood, I'm so happy with. No notes. I think it has some great drama. It's nice and full, but not so full it falls off your head. And it has that very hard won, but very worth it dagging that's very distinctive around the cowl. I do think I will be reusing that piece in future projects. I really like the knife sheath I made. It has just the right amount of hold on the blade that it's not going to go slinging around. You know, I did all those running takes without it flying out, which would have been a problem. It's also easy enough to draw the knife out, which for the purposes of filming was good. For the purposes of an event, it's going to be tied up, so does that really matter? It's personally satisfying. And at the end of the day, what else is art for, really? I did, in fact, have to remake those fur cuffs that got lost somewhere in my costume stash. Really, it wasn't worth filming them, partly because I was running out of time, partly because you just take two long rectangles, long enough to wrap around your calves, stitch the short ends together, and then stuff them into your boots. Instant fur cuffs. I think the only thing I'm going to have to adjust about any of these pieces going forward is the pants. It's pretty tight through the crotch, so when crouching and moving around, the popping seams that I mentioned earlier in the video, they're still happening. So I'm going to have to, as predicted, recut through that center area and just kind of reconfigure some of the fabric in there. The waistline is hemmed and it's fine, but it's also way too big. I was using a safety pin to keep everything up and keep decent in that public park, and that thing was holding on for dear life. Like, it was bent out of shape by the time I got home, so that's not a permanent solution. I'm thinking maybe a drawstring, but other than that, I think this was a wild success. I'm really happy with how it came out. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and if there's anything about this process that you'd like explained in additional detail. I don't know for sure what I'm going to be doing in the next video. I do have a project for a friend coming up that's building a new little guy using the same techniques I used to make the Squarmadillo and the Jack Zabbit. I might be doing something Halloween-y in the next video, like decor, lawn decoration kind of thing. It really just depends. Like I said earlier in the video, a lot of irons in the fire right now. I'm also trying to put out a comic book, my very first, to be a companion piece between seasons 1 and 2 of Route 6.6, so expect to see news about that sometime soon. See the links to my socials, the Goblin Booth socials, the Goblin Booth website, all the things that we're trying to work on right now that we're very excited about but have us very tired and on the ropes, especially with the world kind of being on fire. It's nice to occasionally retreat to a land of magical fantasy. I hope you enjoyed this retreat with me, and I will see you in the next video. Later.
Did that do it?
No.
And sometimes you just completely lose your train of thought while looking like Peter Pan. We'll see, like I said previously. Well. Okay, from the top.